It's too out of, range. Totally. Thank you so much. And I have a first question to start us off with. And since there are so many writers in the audience, I think it's not a bad idea if I start with this kind of writerly question. And my writerly question is that, you two are people who I admire profoundly, and you are not, in your first books. And I am wondering where the seed idea for the book that is published now, where that originated.
It's always hard to trace the origins of books, I feel, but one thing I didn't mention for this book is that, it's an archive, and there are all sorts of things archived in it, both tangible and also ephemeral as well. And it started off with my obsession with Zora Neale Hurston's camera, which she lost while she was in Jamaica in the 1930s. And this book imagines that it was found and the pictures developed. So that's one of the things in the archive of the imagination. So that was the seed.
Yeah, I think it's definitely very hard to figure out what each book is going to be about. My first book was the most recent that I dabbled in, and it was the first one that I ever published. This particular book seems like I started 27 years ago. When I first moved to Colorado, and I was really young, stupid too. So I found myself in a lot of precarious situations, but one of the things that I sort of never forgot, because I grew up in the mountains, is that whenever I felt outside of myself, I would always go find myself in the mountains somewhere. Because my home where I grew up is much like evergreen, and when I was a kid, I used to hike and walk around, and we used to go hunting and fishing with my cousins and stuff. And I sort of lost that when I came to Colorado, so I kept a journal during those moments, and I would sit and reflect and just pour out the garbage that was flowing in my head for what I saw and what I experienced here in Denver. If you really get into the nit and the grit of a city, you can find some not so pleasant things, and that's really where this came from. So.
What about for you?
Yeah, I know, I get the head start on this answer because yeah, this was a seed idea. Like I said, this was the second of the whale books that I'm writing, which will culminate in a third, which is nonfiction, flash nonfiction, photo essay, and poetry all combined. This one was kind of, these were the poems that didn't fit into whale aria, because whale aria really concerned the humpback whale's ecology and its acoustic universe. As I was exploring and observing these whales, it wasn't just the humpbacks that I was seeing. So I thought that it would be, and not just the humpbacks who were moving to me. So I definitely kept these other poems, and I was like, maybe this will be a second book. And then a dear friend of mine who's a nonfiction writer, Anjali Roy, said to me, she said, well, why not make 2 books? You're a whale poet, so this project has to be big. And then I also had to prove some kind of engagement with Moby Dick, if I'm honest. How can you be in the United States and not write into this tradition of, the exploitation of the whale through the whaling industry, and what that meant in terms of categorizations and, those the cetology chapters of Moby Dick that most people like to skip over. Those were my favorite chapters of that damn book. And also like the process of like trying out the whales. You know, trying out meaning like burning their blubber to make oil. Thank you. I know that I asked you to write on the cards, and in my mind I was like, this is a great idea. And it is still a great idea, and maybe you have written on the cards, but it could be also fun if you were to voice questions for us too. So if you have a question, would you please raise your hand and read your card?
This is a question for all three writers on the stage. What are you doing to comfort yourselves in these difficult times right
now? For me, I'm a homebody, so I stay home. I'm an introvert, so I do a lot of reading. I love music, so I'll listen to a lot of music. But sometimes when I get out, I'll go for a walk. I think for me, that kind of eases the idea of having to get out and having to step away from teaching and grading and, you know, whatever the mundane things that I get caught up in. You know, just going for a short stroll and just like watching the world go by, really. Yeah, I'm certainly trying to ignore what what we're living in, you know. Yeah.
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about this. Like, what does it mean to kind of like survive the onslaught of, you know, the news? You know, self-care is not always just feeling good, but also being involved. And so I'm looking for ways to kind of be more and more involved. And I'm really lucky and fortunate that I get to work with young people, or younger people. And it's been actually really inspiring to hear of the ways that they're forming collectives and forming friendships, and what that means in terms of community and being present with each other. You know, there are things that I do, like I have a therapist, and I think that's like really been kind of amazing, who says to me that, you know, it's only in recent years that we are all so globally connected with information that we can just like flick through. And that's doing something to our psyches that is, you know, kind of like not really, it's like evolutionarily too fast for our minds and our bodies and our spirits. And so I try to keep that in mind as well. And so I'm practicing this kind of like detached noticing of my mind, right? And so I'm writing a lot of like love poems to myself, to the environment, to, you know, people who are around me and who I'm scared for.
For me, it's simple. I feel better, more grounded, more centered when I just, on those days that I take the time to have time for myself and just be quiet and breathe. So just a simple practice, and that helps me. It reminds me that I'm connected to something bigger and larger than what's immediately before us. In the book, there's this term that I coined, gelixer, which is the word that I use for the universe and everything in it. So, you know, I try to breathe into that, and that's what helps me.
Thank you. And thank you for this question, and thank you for these answers. I'm thinking a little bit about the experiment also in writing, if I can ask another question. Meaning, like, you both are people who I imagine, or, you know, I put into, I guess, the category in the Front Range seems to be very prominent to think about writing as either lyric or experimental, right? And as we know now, these distinctions are kind of ridiculous. And as BIPOC folks writing in the Front Range specifically, what is your relationship to the experiment?
The experiment. I want to stop experimenting. No, just kidding. I've always been fascinated with like language, and I've always been fascinated with like imagery, and I've always been fascinated by dreams. So for me, my first book was kind of about that. It was like a moment of discovery because it's a mess. My first book was the biggest mess I probably have ever made in my life. But I discovered a whole lot. I defined a whole lot in that experimentation because the book was really about me trying to figure out who I was, because that's what I've been trying to do like my whole life. The book started out as a conversation with my mother because I wanted to find out what she was doing while I was in utero during those 9 months that she was carrying me, because I felt like that was part of my experience as well. And not many people, I don't know, want to know that or want to find out like how you were sort of experimenting that or experiencing that with your mother, because it's the close tie. So there's this huge idea of X in the book that I play with, this idea of the anomaly, the idea of intersection, the idea of, you know, always solving for something. So for me, it was the 9 months of gestation that kind of ties that whole book together. But then I also wanted to know what was happening in the world during those 9 months. And a lot of what I found out was there was a lot of space exploration during the 70s, the early part of the 70s. You know, so I read a lot about, you know, space exploration, nuclear and atomic activities that was happening like all over the world. So I thought that was kind of, you know, sort of an interesting juxtaposition that I was thinking about when it comes to like finding out how you fit in the world. So it was a big mess. I mean, because you know, that's just what I was trying to figure out, you know.
Well, for me, you know, experiment is really just play, and play is fun. You get to do anything, and take risks. So as a novelist, I'm interested in what a novel might become, especially, you know, one which is written out of an awareness of Caribbean space, more specifically for me, Jamaican space. And, you know, I feel like I come from a space of experiment. Is how you move through life, is how language works, is how music works. And so it's also how the page can evolve for me as well. So just interested in pushing at the boundaries of things and seeing what can happen. Sometimes something works, sometimes it doesn't, but it's what I do and it's what I enjoy doing.
I love what you just said, because it's not about affectation, but it's ontological. Like it is part and parcel of the way that you see yourself in language, and then like also in the world, from being in utero to like the subtle effects of everything around you and your mother while she was pregnant. Yeah, and this was actually an earnest question, because I get to ask you this question because I want to learn from it too. Because I'm not sure what my relationship is with the experiment, other than like, maybe if I'm like, oh yeah, with voice, you know, I think of voice as experiment or affectation that changes from collection to collection. And I kind of balk at the people who are like, find your voice. I'm like, oh my God, like, wait, I only get one pair of shoes? You know?
I think my question ties in with that, actually. I was curious, if you couldn't write anymore, what other art form do you think might best serve your ideas or might best inspire your play?
Great question, thank you, Erica. Beautiful question.
I did start out as a writer. I was a painter. When I was a kid, I did a lot of illustrations and I painted, and that's what got me into college. My first semester, I was really getting into this whole idea of my art. My second semester, however, I had to take some writing classes, so I decided to take poetry classes. I took classes with Arthur Z. And I learned so much from Arthur Z. And it's just a wonderful teacher. You know, he introduced me to the material that became my second book. So I didn't start out as a writer. I did love to read and I did dabble in writing, but painting was really my first passion. So if I ever stop writing, that's probably what I will fall back on. I also love photography. I love music. I can't play it for crap, but I love listening to it. So anything that has anything to do with creativity, I have something to fall back on. Because writing, the cover for my book is one of my photographs. The cover for my second book was one of my photographs. So I think I was kind of blessed to let my publisher give me that creative freedom to use my art in not just writing, but also in other practices.
It's a delicious question because I'm just a maker. I like making things and creating things, and if I'm making, I'm happy. And it doesn't have to be writing, even though writing is my primary genre, work. I'm also happy drawing. And I don't have to be good at things to enjoy it. Or, it's not about so much the end result, but more the process. So I've made, for example, sculptural art dolls in connection with one of my books. I've done a one-woman show. I feel that all creativity comes from the same place. And so if you throw a bunch of stuff on the table for me and say, make something, I'm in heaven.
I have a feeling that there's going to be kind of like an art book that the three of us are going to come up with, or the two of you. This is a funny thing. I remember when I was in college as an undergraduate, I read somewhere or I heard someone say, or these things like it wasn't TikTok, because in college there was no internet almost, but that we will be drawn to careers close to the things that we want to be doing. And I was a religious studies major, and my real big love was translating folk songs. And I was like, well, what if after getting this, what if I started to write the folk songs? And so I think my art would be tied somehow to music. I wish I could be a better singer than I am. But the thing about that wishing is that I could actualize it, meaning lessons and doing that. And that's something that I wish I could actually, after tenure maybe. That's such a great question. What about, what's that?
Very soon.
Yeah, inshallah. Are there any other questions from the audience? Lily.
Yeah. So one of the things, I was so captivated by, I'm going to pronounce its name wrong, the Brutes whale? Is that the correct pronunciation? Bruta whale. Yeah, I was so captivated by that idea of scientists not having a name or the name changing, and I just think that's so relevant to kind of existence in general, and also just kind of where we are temporally. And I kind of noticed those things in each of your works as well, with the parentheticals and the title, and then also with the main character being unnamed and only named by the seat that they're in. And I was wondering how naming works for you, this idea of agency, but then also when it's not there, this fluidity. And I was wondering if you guys could speak on that a little bit more.
I love this. I'm obsessed with naming.
Yeah.
There's so many rituals for naming too.
Yeah.
When you have a child, there's a namkaran kind of thing that when a child is born, the child should be the first person to hear the name after the priest says that the child is born under this star, and the name needs to begin with this sound. So the parents come up with it, and they whisper it to the child behind a beetle leaf. And so the child is the first one who knows this and grows into the name. And there's something about names also familially for me, where we have our what they call right name, and then we have what they call call name. So for example, and here I am going to give you away my mother's magic, but my mom's name, her right name is Anjani Devi. And that was the name that's like written on her birth certificate. But nobody calls her that. Well, actually, professional people now in the United States. But she's known by Shanti. And when you were to say, if anyone was to say Anjani, she wouldn't, like it wouldn't register that they were talking to her, right? So yeah, there's something about that too. And I was always told that you shouldn't call, like, or it used to be, that people didn't call even their partners by their names. So my grandmother, my grandfather had a brother called Lalu. And so my grandparents referred to each other as Lalu Bauji, like the sister-in-law of Lalu, and then Lalu Buddy, the brother of Lalu. So even this, there's like a magic to it, as though a name can carry everything about us. And with like the ideas, you know, that are now kind of like having more and more space socially for queerness and fluidity of being, like I think that I really love the idea of donning the cloak of a name in various spaces. Like, you all know me as Rajiv, right? My family doesn't call me that. My family calls me Raimi. Yep. And that is also, my parents give me 4 names because they were like, the call name thing is like let's just actually codify it on paper. This is a very long answer.
Thank you.
Yeah, naming is a very interesting thing. I mean, I don't know, I have this kind of weird thing with trying to figure out like who I am. And I don't know, my culture, I mean, it was my grandmothers who named me, you know. Even the name that I have, Chrysosto, my aunt has the name, I have the name, my niece has the name. You know, so it's a name that seems to not embody one or the other. So, and I think it's kind of interesting to kind of live your life that way, you know, not be sort of set forth by boundaries. And I think that for me, that's always been how I've sort of interacted with my life, is that there's nothing that really can keep me within a boundary. I mean, I'm the only one in my family that has left, you know. But I go back, you know, and oddly enough, my family doesn't call me Chrysosto. You know, they have a name for me. So that's how I know I'm among familiarity, you know, that when they call me and I respond. But Chrysosto is more like a professional, kind of a stiff, you know, kind of response. You know, you call me Chrysosto and I'm like, you know, whether if you call me, my family calls me, there's more of a giddiness to it, you know. So yeah, naming is interesting. It definitely puts definitions to things, but it also can take away definitions or redefine parameters. Yeah.
This book is actually very conscious of naming. How names change over time, and also what remains unnamed also. So for example, even in the title, the Jamaica collection of the Shante Dream Archive, Shante is short for Ashanti. So it's, there's this awareness of how, as a people in Jamaica, in the Caribbean, there are certain African retentions, and it's conscious of how, what sorts of things have been retained within the culture and what has been erased, what has been let go or eroded. For example, there's a character, Kwako, which is his African name, but over time, at different junctures in the book, his name changes. It becomes Cuba, and then Q, and then Q-Boy. And there are also other characters such as 20A. That's all that she's known by. There's also a mango called the number 11 mango as well. And that is based on a true story of mangoes which came on a ship to Jamaica. Not just mangoes, it was this ship, British ship, full of plants, and they were all numbered. And there was one mango called the number 11, which actually remained the number 11 until today. The other plants got their names, but that one remained in number 11. So it's really aware of names and how they work and what that has to do with memory as well. Thanks for that question.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much.
I think we have time for maybe one more question. And if the audience doesn't have a question, well, actually, does anybody have a last question? Because I have one too. But no pressure, like really no pressure.
I have a silly question.
Love it.
At any point, when someone pulls a whale out of the bag and reads the name, do you go, oh?
Literally.
Yeah.
So,
Because
okay.
every time this time, you were as excited as you could be.
Because I was praying that it wouldn't be the manatee.
Okay.
And the reason,
There is one.
yeah, the reason I don't want the manatee is because this is like probably the most vulnerable poem in the collection.
Mm-hmm.
And reading it always kind of like awakens something for me. And yeah, I let it just be up to chance. But then inevitably in every reading that I do, the manatee somehow makes its way into the conversation. And I usually end up reading it in the Q&A, as a matter of fact. But I'm not volunteering.
You could also just leave the manatee out of the bag.
That's true, but I bought these like whales in these tubes, and I was like, manatee's not a whale, and I was like, I need to have a manatee so that I could have it, and I spent an extra like $25. So like, this damn thing is gonna definitely go into the bag. But you're right about that. Because like sometimes it takes a lot out of you to read things that are like vulnerable, right? Well, thank you all so much for the gift of your presence, and thank you to my co-readers here. And buy our books, buy their books, get them signed, and come talk to us and ask us your other questions that you didn't want to ask. And let's say thank you also to Matter again, because this place is just incredible. And we'll be sitting at different stations, so Soso will be here, Marcia will be here, and I'll be up here. Sure. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, this one's. It's meant to be talk about it. It's a, yeah, this is great. I love time, the universe, the Ivor, and then the Onions. I like the oh God.
I'm sorry. You came for the event?